If I can get your attention, I think we'll get started so we can stay on schedule. My name is Rodney Ellis, and I'm a member of the Texas State Senate and proud to represent the Baker Institute and Rice University and the great people of the state of Texas, all over the state, particularly in the 13th Senatorial District. Steve Murdoch, we are here because we all have a tremendous amount of respect for you. You were giving us advice about demographic trends in the state when I showed up in 1990, and of course when Chairman Ogden showed up and Representative Villarreal as well. We're very glad to be here at the Baker Institute. I think that this institute does so much for our city and our nation and does a good job of bringing people from all walks of life and all philosophical persuasions together. My job is to moderate, talk a little bit. I want to introduce the two panelists briefly. I won't read the long bios. You can pull those up online. They're two very good and dear friends of mine. And I think after a brief introduction, we'll start with Chairman Ogden, if that's all right. All tax bills have to start in the House. And I will say this, most of the issues that people have talked to me about during my 22 years in the Senate and my 6 years on the Houston City Council, most of them involve some money. Now, there were a few that came across my desk that didn't involve money, but most of them involve money. And usually people would just come in and focus, Steve, on that little piece of the pie. I had the privilege of being chair of the Senate Finance Committee for a quick minute in 2001, and Steve Ogden was one of my closest allies and my conscience on a lot of issues. He kept me on the straight and narrow. And kept me from some of my traditional tendencies. He has a strong military background. He was a member of the State House, a distinguished member of the State Senate. I saw John Monfort in the audience. He was chair of the Senate Finance Committee when I first got there. Steve Ogden decided not to run 2 years ago. And I was one of many people who reached out to him and said, I really wish you'd reconsider that, and I'm glad that he did. He took us through a very difficult session the last go-around, and we're going to miss his intelligence a lot. He may want to add more to his background. I'll let him do that. One bill in particular that I worked with him on last session and I was very proud of, and I think will give you some indication of the challenges we face. I think we have clearly an understanding that we are not going to raise revenue. Someone asked that question. It's the last question the speaker a minute ago. Texas is virtually dead last in terms of the amount of money we take out of your pocket to run the government. Google it up. Go and check. Now, it could mean that all of the other states just take too much out of the pockets of their taxpayers. Could be our economy just grows so well. Whatever the rationale is, the statistics show that we take less out of your pocket than any other state in the country. When Governor Bush was in office, I knew we were going to do some tax cutting, and I don't want to just be there. And so I decided I'd get into tax cutting business as well. If we were going to cut taxes, I saw a blurb in the paper where I think in New York or Florida, they were pushing this back to school sales tax holiday stuff. So I decided, look, this is all we're going to do this session. The governor's going to run for president. We are going to cut taxes. So I'm going to cut them too. So I put in a bill with a very broad caption relating to tax cuts. And maybe I asked for a 2-week sales tax holiday on back to school items. In this business, you ask for what you want. Then you take what you can get, but you start out and then you compromise at some point. So the bill wasn't going anywhere, but all these other bills were passing. I think it was a colleague from Waco who had Jim Hunt from North Carolina's R&D, Research and Development tax cut deal that pretty much created that triangle in North Carolina. You could have just taken out North Carolina, took out Texas, plugged in North Carolina, pretty much the same bill, over-the-counter drugs. Somebody had that bill. Internet tax collection, tax connection, everything was in there. All those bills sailed out of the Senate, and then they died in the House. Representative Villarreal. And so one day Governor Bush called me in and said, I see you got a tax cutting bill. I didn't think you'd have one of those. I said, well, yes, sir. And he said, it has a broad caption. Oh, you're reading my bills. And he said, I want to help you get your bill out of the Senate. And then when it gets over to the House, since I can't get my bills out of the House, I want to load all my bills in your bill and make you one of the biggest tax cutters in the history of Texas. So in this business, you kind of posture a little bit. I said, well, my understanding of the tradition, sir, is if it's my bill, if I don't want to be recognized, it would be unorthodox to go get someone else to pass my bill. So, I could decide not to be recognized on my bill. But this is kind of appealing to me. I have a couple of bills I'd like for you to help me with, if you don't mind. I got a bill to ban executing people who are, the word politically correct word now is not MR, but back then you would say in the statute mentally retarded. I had my hate crimes bill. I can't remember the others, but I had a laundry list. I was asking for what I wanted, take as much as I could get. So he said, I'm not involved in that hate crimes bill. So I said, well, when they get in there and they're having a Republican caucus meeting, don't give them that old evil eye when my bill comes up. And on the MR bill, so we worked a little arrangement that he wouldn't touch my bills, knowing they'd die of their own weight. He didn't really have to. So that bill did pass. It ended up being a weekend for a sales tax holiday. And then we loaded all that other stuff in it. This past session, knowing we were not going to raise revenue, but I sincerely thought we needed additional revenue. Either you could cut somebody else's program and move money around, or we needed additional money. I didn't feel good about not funding growth in public education in particular. My read of the numbers would be that it's the first time since Reconstruction we didn't fund growth in the public schools. Nobody documented whether or not the public schools were growing during the Civil War. So we might have funded it during the Reconstruction, but as far back as my staff could do the research, we've always funded growth in the public schools. Our demographer clearly shows us the demographic trends of this state are very much the demographic trends of the country. Overwhelmingly large Hispanic population, pretty much stable for whites and also for African Americans. Growing Asian population in the state of Texas. It's the future of our state. As Henry Cisneros says, it's no longer the Hispanics or those Hispanics. It's our Hispanics. It's our future. I think that was a big mistake. So I was trying to figure out how to come up with money, knowing we were not going to raise taxes. And we couldn't act like fees were not taxes anymore. We did about as much of that as we could do. So I had this idea. Somebody wanted to get rid of my little sales tax holiday. It's only, it's really not that much money. It's a drop in the bucket, but it's great press. In fact, it's such good press, sometimes I can't even go do my press conference to brag about the back-to-school sales tax holiday. The governor and all 181 of my colleagues will go get the press before I can get it on that bill. But someone wanted to take that little money from a sales tax holiday and put that in education. It really put me in a box. What would I do about it? So I decided, why don't we review all of the tax cuts we've done? We don't know how many we have. There are so many tax cuts in the law in Texas. The state comptroller has written me 3 times. They cannot calculate all of them. Somebody slipped them in as far back as the Republic was created. All kinds of stuff. All of yours are justified, I'm sure, if you're in the industry that gets one. So my idea was we could never go in and end some of the tax breaks we've given on our own. It's very difficult to do. It'd be full employment for the lobby, by the way. Sometimes lobbyists want me to put one in so they can get paid to kill it. So I decided, why don't we take all of the tax cuts through the sunset review process, just like we do state agencies. It was a good idea in 1975, 1995, 1625. It'll be a good idea to pass it again. And if not, then it would go away. Much to my surprise, the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee wouldn't put his name on it, but helped me perfect the bill, working with his staff, and even said, you better make it a constitutional amendment so it won't get vetoed. He was kind enough to leave the vote open on that bill, maybe 30 minutes in the Senate Finance Committee, because his quorum vanished when it was time to vote. And I'm going to push that again because I do think that we've got to begin to look for additional sources of revenue in the state of Texas. I've always carried the casino gambling bill. Some of my colleagues here with me today don't necessarily support it. I don't gamble, although I made a little of my living as an investment banker, so maybe that is playing the numbers. And I'm going to push it again. It would take a constitutional amendment to do it. We'll see what happens, but it still won't generate enough revenue. Our first panelist who's going to speak before I introduce the second one is the current chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and has represented the state of Texas very well and has always been known as an independent thinker. He says what he thinks regardless of who gets angry. And because of that, the people of Texas owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude. Would you please welcome and thank Senator Steve Ogden. How much time? I think we got about an hour in total, Steve.
Yeah. But how long do you want this meeting?
I'd say, 10 minutes. Yeah, 10 minutes. Okay. You're the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee still. What all you did for my district, you can take 20 if you want it.
Well, I'm the former chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. I was replaced by Senator Tommy Williams about a month ago, and I was talking to Blaine Brunson this morning, and I said, the tradition in the Senate is that if you're a chairman of a committee and you're not coming back for the next session, which I'm not, that during the interim you get replaced. Well, basically because of politics, the lieutenant governor hasn't replaced anybody but me. So he thinks I'm wonderful, but I'm the only chairman that's been fired this year. We'll see what happens. Representative, it's good to see you, and I'm looking forward to what you have to say. And I would not be here if it had not been for Rodney. I mean, I have completed my career in the Senate. I am in the oil and gas business, and I'm working every day to go find as much oil and gas as I can. And but Rodney asked me, and I said, well, because you asked me and because it's an opportunity for me to talk to some important people, I'll do it. But he and I have been friends for a long time. And I want to tell you simply, this man is as talented as Barack Obama. He is a Democrat star in this state. And I can say that because I worked with him for 15 years. One of the things that I learned, because he is so eloquent and he is so articulate, that when he's on the Senate floor and mumbling, you better pay attention. And so I would sit in my chair and I would just wait for him to get up. And if he was talking in his capable way, I didn't worry about it. But if he's back there kind of, I was out of my chair. I always was. And I'd say, now what is it that you're talking about, Senator? I also, while he was talking about this, and I was thinking about the hate crimes bill, because that, that was probably the most emotional and partisan bill that we voted on in the last 10 years, or at least close to it. And the assumption was basically that all the Democrats would vote for it, and all the Republicans would vote against it. And one of the things that I learned over the years is that be careful of those assumptions, and it's always important to look at a single issue and look at it from different perspectives. I thought I knew why Senator Ellis was proposing this bill, and I thought I understood why he thought it was a good idea. Based on my understanding of why he thought it was a good idea, I was against it. But then I began to think, I said, well, what if you look at it a little bit differently? What if you assume that hate crimes is not always a one-way street? What if it's just as likely that a minority could commit a hate crime against a minority, a non-minority, white woman, for example? And what if you looked at this as a tough on crime bill? I mean, Republicans always vote for that. You know, so-and-so did this. We need to enhance the penalty. We need to double the sentence. We need to make it a capital offense. I mean, that's just standard Republican methodology. Well, here we are. We were enhancing the penalty for a crime. So if you looked at it from the standpoint that hate crimes are not always a one-way street, that they can go both directions, and secondly, if you look on it as, hey, this is a tough on crime bill, maybe you could vote for it. And that's why I did. And so I think I was one of the 2 Republicans that passed that bill, and I never regretted voting for it. And I guess my point is that if you'll just stop and think sometimes, a good idea out there can be a good idea for several different reasons. Now, I have handed Rodney a green folder there. And what it has in it is 4 position papers that I've written in the last 6 months on how to fix higher education, how to fix public school finance, how to fix highway funding, and how to fix the business tax. And I went to the governor about 6 months ago and asked him to put us in special session so we could act on these things. I was kind of disappointed. I guess nobody else would be surprised that he didn't do it. But one of the basic themes in all of these ideas is this. We have a number of issues: public school finance, higher education funding, transportation, business tax, that everybody says are a problem. But because of the political situation, there is no consensus on how to solve it. And there is a lot of fear that if anybody would step forward with a proposal that could conceivably pinch somebody's toes, that they won't be back. So what do you do in a situation where you know it's a problem, it's almost intractable politically, and what do you do? And here's what I have recommended. Ask the people of the state of Texas. Now, we have a Constitution that people love to criticize. But I'm not so sure that Constitution has served us badly over the years. And it's directly related to a Constitution whose entire intent is to constrain the ability of the government in Austin to do much of anything. And so if we want to do anything, we got to go amend the Constitution. But it's not that bad of a substitute for initiative and referendum. And I believe, with respect to public school finance, with respect to highway funding, with respect to the business tax, we'll never fix it till we get the issue on the ballot and allow the people of the state of Texas to weigh in. And one of the things that I've said before is that there is a tendency, I think, amongst all of us, that if we make a proposal, we don't want somebody to tell us no. But in this particular case, no is okay. Because if the people of the state of Texas say, we don't like this idea to fix it, that also is a clear signal for the legislature to act. And let me give you a specific example. Public school finance. I was in the legislature for 23 years. Over half of that time, we were getting sued over public school finance. We are now being sued now. I don't know. Mike Moses may know, but I think it's 400 or 500 public school districts are now suing the state of Texas over the constitutionality of our public school finance system. Now, they wouldn't be spending all this money and hiring all these lawyers if they didn't think they had a decent chance of winning. Something is going to happen, and I will predict next session or after next session, if the legislature basically says we can't do anything because we don't know what the courts are going to do, that's going to be the dominant issue next year. How do you fund the public schools in a constitutional way? Well, back in 1993, I think it was, when we wrote Senate Bill 7, which was the first public school finance bill. People always said Bill Ratliff is the father of Robin Hood. That's what was in that bill. I was on that conference committee in the House, and I helped write that bill. And the issue hasn't changed much at the end of the day. The issue is that the courts have ruled that public school children in general deserve the same amount of funding, and it doesn't make any difference what district they're in. It's the public school system of Texas, and you've got to equally distribute the money to all the public school children in Texas. There's no constitutional entitlement to more money because of where you live. That's what they've said. And the issue today, as it was then, is that at a specific tax rate, many school districts have a large disparity in the amount of money they receive per student. A huge disparity. And so if you're in the XYZ district and you're taxing at $1.20 and you're getting $5,000 per year child, is this fair if in another district where they're taxing $1.10 they're getting $8? And that's what's going on. And I will predict that the courts are going to say, no, it's not fair. And the legislature is going to be forced to act. Well, I've been down there for 22 years. I know all the arguments, and I know where all the politics is, and I know the inability of the legislature to act without a gun pointed to its head. And so my recommendation is to get the Constitution cleared up with a well-written constitutional amendment and allow the people of the state of Texas to weigh in. Now, if I was writing that amendment, I would basically tell the people of the state of Texas that we're going to get rid of the current public school finance system method of taxation in its entirety. We're just going to eliminate it, sunset it. And we're going to replace it with a statewide property tax of $1. And all that money is going to be collected, and it'll come into the state of Texas, and then we'll redistribute it in some sort of equitable formula. If you do the math, because the dollar tax is so much more efficient than all the stuff that we've got going on the rest of the state of Texas, including all those tax exemptions and write-offs, you'll collect as much or more money than we currently are with the current system of taxing at about $1.17. So it can work. Now, it will be controversial, but my point is it can work. And then the thing that I would add to that is that I would allow individual districts, with voter approval, to levy what I would call an enrichment tax of not to exceed 20 cents per 100. So the maximum school tax in Texas for maintenance and operation could be no more than $1.20. $1, that's a statewide property tax, and 20 cents is issued in the district, and it would remain in the district. I know that system would work. I know it'd be efficient. I don't know if it's politically possible, but I believe that is the best way to solve what is going to be inevitably, I think, a public school finance crisis in 2013. Now, I'm going to change the subject a little bit, and then I'm going to sit down because I mentioned higher ed and transportation and business tax, and I'll talk about those if you want to. But there's another issue that concerns me, and I think it is the elephant in the room, and every day we delay in addressing it is another day where our country's in danger, and I'm talking about the federal deficit. Now, I am proud to report to you that the state of Texas is in great financial shape. We, 2 years ago, were in a big financial hole, but the economy has recovered nicely, and not only is our budget balanced, but we're going to run about a $4 billion surplus this biennium. And we're going to have about $9 billion in the rainy day fund. And we have a credit rating that is better than the United States of America. We're financially doing pretty good. Part of that is because of great legislators right here. I mean, they're the best. But that's not the only reason. And it's probably not the most significant reason. The reason that the state of Texas is in such good financial shape is because the Constitution makes us. We have to balance the budget. Now, politicians are generally people. They want to please people. They're pleasers. They want people to like them, so they'll vote for them. And so, yes is always an easy answer, and no is always a hard answer. And all of us, when we're in there, are being petitioned by our constituents. And I have one of the biggest, hungriest one there is, Texas A&M University. We need more of this. We need more of this. We need more of this, blah, 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 blah. And without that constitutional limitation, it's impossible for us to say no. But it's not if you go in there and say, look, I'd sure like to help you, but we just don't have any money. Let's sit down and try to prioritize our spending and spend the money in the best possible way possible. And that's why I think Texas state government seems to be working better than the federal government. We need a constitutional amendment in Washington, D.C. It doesn't have to be written in such a way that there's no flexibility. You can have super majorities to, in case of times of national emergency or not. But if we don't do that, I think because of the system that we're in and the reality of the politics of the day, we probably won't go broke, but there is going to be an enormous fiscal crisis that will occur sometime in the future in which all of us will suffer greatly that could have been avoided. $1 trillion is such a huge amount of money, it's hard to conceptualize how much it is. You know, you're normally dealing with trillions, you're talking about space travel, okay? Not the amount of money your government is spending. But our national deficit is about 50% larger. The national deficit is about 50% larger than the entire economy of the state of Texas. And we go around bragging about the fact that the economy of the state of Texas is about 7th in the world. The deficit's about, it may be exaggeration, 30% larger than the entire state gross product of Texas in a year. If you said, or had the opportunity to spend $1 million a day, every day since Christ was born, you'd still have another 500-600 years to go before you spent your first trillion. Do the math. It's unbelievable. And so I tried last session and failed, but I hope they'll try again to petition the Congress under the Constitution for a constitutional convention for the purpose of balancing the budget. People are afraid of a constitutional convention, but I don't know how you could be more afraid of a constitutional convention than this deficit. And what I would hope that would happen is if the legislatures of these United States would begin to put pressure on the U.S. Congress, they would act to save our country from this debt. With that, I'll sit down and thank you.
Thank you, Steve. He mentioned to me that this is the first time that he had been on the campus of Rice University, so it really means a lot to us to have you here, and thank you very much. Mike Villarreal hails from San Antonio. He's considered one of the brightest lights in the legislature in either party. He was raised in San Antonio. He's been born there as well. His father immigrated from Mexico. His parents stressed the importance of education to their kids. He's a product of a Catholic school system there in San Antonio. His mother's from the Edgewood School District, very historic district that has brought about a lot of reforms, talking about litigation, education. He started off the way a lot of our kids ought to start off, at a community college, and then went to study economics of all things at Texas A&M University. Later got his master's degree from Kennedy School at Harvard and is working on a PhD in public policy at the University of Texas in Austin while he's in the legislature. He made a living as a public finance professional for a while, and that's how I first got a chance to visit with him. The parliamentarian of the House suggested that we get to know one another. Would you please welcome Representative Mike Villarreal?
Thank you, Rodney. It is an honor to be on this panel to share the stage with both of you. I have served in the legislature for going on 13 years, and I have to say these two gentlemen represent our finest legislators in Texas. And I've learned so much from watching them. And I have a few stories to share. I'll try to keep them brief. When Rodney comes over to the House, you know he's in the room. He just, you know, he doesn't sort of hide himself. He sort of walks through like he's the president who's arrived to give the State of the Union speech. He really acts like he owns whatever room he's in. And it's always a pleasure when he stops you and wants to conference with you. And over the years, I've had many occasion to be invited and included in Rodney's kind of inner circle. And what I appreciate so much about Rodney is his sense of teamwork. You know, us legislators often think the world revolves around us, but Rodney is somebody who includes others. And, you know, I'm thinking of the Texas grants reform that we worked on last legislative session, when you included me in a conference of many of your own constituents. And together we strategized to figure out how could we reform how we prioritize the students who are going to be receiving a Texas grant, trying to be fair to all that apply while recognizing we have limited funding. That program is our highest and best investment, I believe, in higher education, and we need to keep it going. And your leadership on that and your willingness to include others, not just in your own party, but across the aisle, is a reason why those kind of programs exist and thrive. So thank you, Rodney, for your leadership. Senator Ogden, if anybody has not had an opportunity to listen to Senator Ogden give sort of opening remarks to the last legislative session when he was elected by his colleagues pro tem of the Senate, you should go back and find that video clip. In it, you will hear the senator so humbly receive this honor from his colleagues, but you also hear him describe Texas and how it has changed and who are Texans of today. And you'll hear him describe an event he attended. It was a funeral of a fallen soldier. And he describes everybody who was present at the funeral. And he recognizes that the soldier, the fallen soldier, was of Asian descent, Vietnamese descent, but the people in attendance were Hispanic, African American, Anglo. It was a diverse congregation, but it was also, as you recognized, a representative sample of who Texas is. And you asked your colleagues and all House members who listened for us to set aside our partisan differences to take on the big challenges that confront today's Texas. And I really appreciated that. And it's that kind of looking forward, inclusive vision that I think we need to carry with us, learn from you, to make this next session a more productive session and to make Texas a better Texas. Thank you for your leadership. I have the pleasure of serving in the Texas House at a time when Texas is changing. It's a fascinating time. And of course, Texas politics is always an interesting event. But right now in particular, as a state changes in its demographic composition, both in terms of ethnicity, We already know we are a majority-minority state. We know in the next 3 to 4 years, Hispanics will be the largest segment. And we've heard a lot about kind of the racial changing, ethnic changing of the state. A couple other observations that I think are worth taking note of when you're thinking about the context of public policy in Texas. We're becoming a more urban state. Vast majority of Texans live in a triangle made up of Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, and then across to Houston. We're also becoming a state that has two different populations. I mean, typically when you think about kind of how folks are distributed along any measure, you think of sort of a normal bell curve, right? Look at our age population. We have the very old and we have the very young. So yes, we have 5 million young people, but we also have the baby boomer generation that's moving into retirement. And these two populations are putting a lot of demands on our state government, not just education, but also healthcare. There's a lot of talk about Medicaid. And certainly 75% of the recipients, the beneficiaries, are women who are giving birth to children. But somewhere close to 75% of the cost is represented by seniors who need nursing homes to provide them safety. Of course, we're living through very divisive political times. When you layer all this together, you have a legislative process that can become dysfunctional, can fail to see long-term, to only make decisions to survive, not to create. I have great concerns about where we are as a legislature. I'm naturally an optimist, but I suppose 13 years in the legislature has sort of beaten some of that out of me, and now I'm a little bit more practical. I'm afraid that we could turn into a dysfunctional level of government, not so different than the US Congress. One that certainly will always balance its budget, but may fail to make investments in the foundations of our infrastructure, of our basic services that we know historically have been smart investments to make. Now, I am here today because prior generations invested in building Texas A&M University. And when I left that university and to move on in my profession, I left with an understanding that one day it would be my turn to return the favor. I think we can all identify ways in our own lives, and because everybody here is a part of a unique group of Texans. I mean, here you are using your own time, middle of the workday, to discuss and learn about the state of politics. You guys are sort of an elite class. But every single one of you, I think, are able to take part in this discussion because you've benefited in prior generations, whether it's in the public school system you attended, or the public universities, or the medical centers that brought you into this world, or have helped treat you in times of illness, or maybe even employ you today. These systems have made your life and our lives collectively better. I believe we have an obligation to return the favor by investing for the folks that are going to follow us. And today's state of politics, I think, are keeping us from fulfilling that moral obligation. I've been a part of this day with you listened to some other panelists talk about education, transportation, vouchers. And let me tell you, we can get into a detailed conversation on any of these subjects, on the merits of a voucher program and how it might play out in different types of school districts with different types of families. But I step back and I think to myself, this is just a distraction. What's really going on here is a faction that's in control of setting the agenda is keeping us from noticing that we're really in very difficult budget circumstances. We have a population that is growing faster than our revenue stream. By necessity, we're unable to make proper investments in transportation, in higher ed, in public ed. And so, in order to hide that, we're being told, oh, look at the diversions from TxDOT. Oh, we got these diversion problems. Well, that figure amounts to something like $300 million. What kind of road is that going to pay for if we end all diversions from TxDOT? Or vouchers. Let's get serious. That is being proposed as a budget-cutting strategy. Not because there's any research that shows it will advance the quality of a child's learning. Certainly not a population of 5 million students. And so, my friends, I think we have a lot of work to do. I think our greatest challenge today is one of leadership. We need leadership, and that's why I was so inspired by your opening remarks last legislative session. We need a leadership that says, we're all in this together. We are Texas. Let's put aside this partisan haggling. Let's think about how we're going to leave this state better than we found it. Because that has always been the formula for this state's prosperity. Until we do that, we're just going to be fighting in the weeds over distractions. Thank you.
Good job. Very good job, Mike. Thank you so much for being here. And it is your son's birthday today or tomorrow?
Today.
Today. So that really means a lot that you would be here today. Look, I'm going to go to questions. I'm going to ask one question while you all are thinking about any questions you have. We can talk to one another all the time. Here's my one question. Mike, you sort of alluded to it. It would be, I guess, sort of oxymoron to say you wouldn't have politics in what we do, but we clearly have 3 parties operating in the legislature. The numbers for the Democrats have gotten so slim, we can get along. Not a lot of friction in our party. But you have the traditional Republican Party, and you have the insurgency effort. Even in the Senate, where historically you wouldn't have a lot of turnover, some of my colleagues on the Republican side, normally we think these seats were pretty safe. Usually we end up going out in a casket. I haven't had any going to the pokey that I can remember. But it's kind of like, sometimes when I saw them, they joke about in county government, said either they go to the graveyard or go to jail. But usually these Senate seats, people get that. They don't open up that often. I guess that's why there's generally such a big fight when one does open up. But you do have this insurgency effort on the Republican side. You had a very competitive race for the U.S. Senate. You have a long-serving governor. I've seen over the years when you're making budget decisions, this business is, as old Bill Hobby said when I worked for him, 90% of being in the legislature is finance. The other 10% is poetry. Now, it could be voter ID or vouchers, but it's all in the poetry category. But it takes a lot of time, obviously, for both of you. Starting with you, obviously, Steve. What parting advice can you give us operating in this dynamic? You know, obviously when Governor Bush was running for president, that cloud was there, and whatever we did had a lot of impact on what happened in the budget. When he became president, not as much. The one session when we picked our presiding officer, and you know, it sort of worked all right. But you do have, I assume, a lot of people, leaders, the speaker. When you comment, Mike, you think about it from that standpoint, a speaker whose coalition would be all of you guys, meaning males and females, the Democrats, and enough of the Republicans initially to get in. I mean, it doesn't make for, the three of us have districts. I think I'm right where we have not had to, at least I have not had to go, when I walk on the Senate floor, I'm not looking over my shoulder, worried about a lot of knives from my district in my back. I mean, that's some, but I'm saying I don't go in that, I don't have, the three of us don't have to make decisions based on whether or not we're gonna come back. Could make more money if we got the heck on out anyway, if that was what motivated us. But there are a lot of people who are, and I try to be sensitive, constrained by, they hung up on wanting to come back. They have forgotten how nice life was before this title was in front of their names. Mm-hmm. But comment on that, how we operate, Steve, in this environment, and Mike, from your vantage point as well. Let's start with you, Steve.
Oh, I was hoping Mike could go.
Yeah, I can if you want me to.
Well, I share their concern. I was talking to Dr. Murdoch just before I came here, and the concern is at the end of the day, you still have to govern. And one of the things that discouraged me personally happened at the Republican debates last spring, when all 7 of them were still in the race. I think that week Perry was ahead, but I'm not sure. The question was, if you could get $10 of budget cuts for $1 of tax increase, would you do it? None of them would do it. How could you not take that deal? If you're a fiscal conservative, how could you not take that deal? I mean, they're trapped in the ideology and in the belief that if they raised $1 of taxes, even if they got $10 of budget cuts, that somehow they'd be punished by the electorate. So it's discouraging, and it is, I'm scared about it. If you, and I talked about it with respect to the budget deficit. I mean, the Congress of the United States is, I think because of the partisan divide, slowly but surely destroying the country by their inaction and their irresponsibility. Mm-hmm. So I think there's 2 things that I think. One is sort of a new thought. Pay attention to this election. The people of America have an opportunity to weigh in, not only at the presidential level, but also at the state level too. And I think we need to pay attention to what they have to say, who turns out and why they voted. Secondly, and I said this in my remarks, when you get in these kind of political stalemates that are intractable, what's wrong with asking the people? And if I was going back, that's what I'd be doing that from day one. I would be trying to get the legislature, and I'd try to get the governor to declare it as an emergency, to get some constitutional amendments on the ballot to clear up things like, how are we going to pay for public schools? Should the business tax be an income tax, or should we even have it? How are we going to pay debt service on highway taxes? I haven't thought of a constitutional amendment for higher ed, but I'll be working on that too. So that would be my answer. Pay attention to the results of the election and when we're stuck, why don't we ask the people that sent us there for some help?
Ronnie, can you ask your question again? Are you asking how are we going to move forward during these difficult political times this coming session?
Yeah.
Or how should we?
How can we operate within the political parameters from the House perspective that are a reality?
Okay.
The Speaker's coalition, obviously.
Yeah. I think that I think it's always a coalition. And that's the good thing about the Texas Legislature and how it's different than the U.S. Congress. We do not elect our presiding officer in the House in a party caucus meeting. We elect that person on the House floor. And if you want to become Speaker, you need to appeal to all or as many members on the House floor. That's a really big deal. We need to preserve that quality of the Texas House. And I'm really optimistic about Joe Strauss rising in stature, his position, his influence in the Texas Legislature. I think our governor and our lieutenant governor are in weaker positions than they were last legislative session. Joe now has 2 sessions under his belt as presiding officer and has a very strong coalition to govern with. No doubt about it, he will be our next speaker once again. And though there are some Democrats who are kind of saber rattling, let me tell you, even that one member is going to go vote for Joe Strauss. You can mark my words on that. So moving forward on the budget, I think that kind of coalition between Republican chairmen, folks who are thinking long-term about the state of Texas, and Democrats who want to be a part of solving problems are enough to play what I suspect we're going to play this coming session, that is a more moderating role, which is going to be kind of unique for us because usually crazy stuff happens in the House and then you guys have to clean it up in the Senate. I can see a scenario where the Senate is going to be letting go very early on some not so fully baked ideas, and the House is going to have to slow them down. So that's sort of my very kind of general anticipation of what's going to happen and what should happen.
The other thing, and I know John Montford will appreciate this, be careful what you do with the 21 vote rule. And I remember when the shoe was reversed and the Republicans were the insurgents and the Democrats had all the reins of power, and I don't know why, but they didn't change the rules. They allowed the 21 vote rule to stay, and maybe because Bullock was just such a force, he didn't need it. But that 21 vote rule in many ways has served our state well, because even next session you can't do you can't make a significant change to our state without a consensus in the legislature. And it's not always straight Republican. He alluded to the fact that the Republicans, in my opinion, and there may be as many as 20, are split. And it's split between the conservatives and the more conservative. I don't want to say it in a negative way, because a lot of the things that the most conservative people are advocating for, I agree with. So I don't want to denigrate them, but there is a split. And so you can't always assume that on any issue all 20 Republicans are going to be for it, and all you need is to get one Democrat. But the 21 vote rule forces us to work together and find a consensus, and it is a break on the most extreme things that some of us might want to do.
It's your turn. Any questions? Yes, sir.
It's a factual question, I guess. I was noticing back during the last legislative session the sources of revenue for the state of Texas. And I was noticing there was one line item there from the federal government. And the amount of revenue that comes to Texas from the federal government is almost equal to all of the taxes raised by the state of Texas. Where is that money from? Where do we get that money? About 42% of our entire revenue, source of revenue, comes from the federal government.
Comes from a combination, sure. It comes from a combination of, let's name the big ones, right? Medicaid, Title I public education funding, transportation funding. Then there are many other areas, but those are sort of the big ones. And that's a very salient point to highlight, that we've been able to balance our budget over the last decade because we have had federal dollars to help us do that. We've also had better economic times that we've saved in anticipation of more difficult times. We also had the federal stimulus dollars in 2009 that really saved us. But yeah, that's the reason why we've been able to finance our budget. And it is important to, I want to kind of make a factual correction on a statement that's been made, that we didn't fund growth in education. That's what we failed to do. In fact, we cut deeper than just not funding growth. And correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Ogden, but we removed $5.4 billion from the public education system. And though state funding went up, it only went up because we, during the 2009 session, artificially decreased it so we could move it in other areas and use federal stimulus dollars in its place. And so, I wish I had a chalkboard behind me. And so, when the federal stimulus dollars went away, state dollars had to go up. And they did. They didn't go up higher on a per student basis than we were spending in the prior years. But state money did go up, but it didn't go up as high. Certainly didn't fund growth, but it also didn't fund the same level of services that were being delivered in the 2009 session. And that's just one example of how dependent we are on federal dollars. And when the fiscal cliff happens, if it happens, we're going to be in a very difficult situation to figure out, okay, how are we going to pay for our hospital system, our road system, public ed that we've already cut?
I want to say one real quick thing. I've never heard Senator Ogden speak before, but I'm really impressed, by the way. And I can tell he's an honorable man, principally because he's a former Southern legislator.
Thank you.
Israel is all your money. You ask, where does the federal money come from? I mean, all of us in government, we get the money from the same place. We get it from the taxpayers. Maybe an offshoot of your question would be interesting to look at how much federal money in Texas we turn down. You know, when I travel around the country, you know, our system of government makes us real popular. People in California and New York, every time we turn it down, I run into them, they said, turn down some more, it helps us. And we will see that with the Federal Health Care Reform Act as well, since, as I understand it, you know, our money is education and health care. They're the big drivers in terms of what we do in Texas. That's where the bulk of the money goes. we do have some dedicated funds that obviously we've been moving around. The last question to the speaker, I think, was about transparency in government. That's going to help a bit. I think it'll help us to, Steve and Mike, make some difficult choices when you know what we're doing. By and large, people, I think, of my 22 years, people don't really know what we do in state government, as evidenced by intelligent people don't know where we are. I mean, there are people I see all the time. They say, Senator, when you headed back to Washington? And if I don't want to talk to them, I say, well, I'm leaving in the morning. Don't call. just email me. That's an indication that they don't know what we do. If I'm just saying, get it mixed up. You got me, Representative, Senator. But the transparency is gonna help. But Steve, I'd be interested in your response. I know you were thinking. I could see that submarine mind when Mike was commenting on the education figures in particular.
Well, the first thing is nobody understands school finance, and you can honestly argue it from 100 different ways and come to 100 different conclusions. And the way I looked at it was I spent as much money as I possibly could on education, and one of the ways that we got kept from cutting education even more, because though there is a number out there that we cut education by 5.6 billion or 5.4, and I know how that number's arrived at. When the bill came out of the House, the cut was 10. And so what I spent the whole session was trying to get it back to 5. One of the ways we did that is what is euphemistically called an accounting trick, but we had to. And that is that we delayed one of the payments that we make to school districts into the fiscal year 2014, which doesn't count against our budget. That's $1.8 billion. That's how much you send. That's how much the state sends out to the schools every month. $1.8 billion, and we are fortunate that that deferral is going to be okay, because the state, I said, is running a $4 billion surplus. First thing we got to do is pay the deferral off. I know John Monfort, I think, probably did it a couple of times when he was chairman of finance, but overall spending for public education in absolute terms was up. Spending per pupil was down substantially because of growth. But we did the very best we could in a very tough economic situation 2 years ago, in my opinion.
So we were constrained by powers that had more influence than us, to put it euphemistically, saying we would not tap into the rainy day fund regardless of why it was
I think that
created.
that was the big decision.
Yeah.
And the decision not to use the rainy day fund necessitated making deep cuts in our per pupil level of spending for children.
Well, here's where I disagree with it, and I hate to read about this tomorrow with Kate in the paper, but because there was this political statement that we're not going to touch the rainy day fund, I did the deferrals. We deferred $1.8 billion of school funding for one day. The schools were never going to miss it, but from an accounting standpoint, we could do it. And we also deliberately underfunded Medicaid to the tune of about $5 billion because we wouldn't touch the rainy day fund. So at least writing that budget and getting the members to vote for it, we did. We just didn't have to admit it. And the rainy day fund will have to cover those holes when we get back in next session. So
All the pressure will be to do that with the growth in the budget.
So a lot of the frustration that I know the citizenry have is that it looks like, you know, some guy behind the curtain doing all this kind of stuff. But we spent the rainy day fund, we just didn't admit it. And the reason we spent it is because of those deferrals. And when Rodney voted for it, and when Rodney didn't vote for it, but when I voted for it on the floor, I knew, and so did the people that voted for it, that we were spending the rainy day fund, but at least politically we didn't have to admit it.
Well, I hope we end up spending the rainy day fund, because that verse of the song hasn't been sung yet.
Well, I think you know,
the governor did redefine, right, the use of the rainy day fund, but I wouldn't be surprised if we show up in January and there's a new definition of what to do with the rainy day fund.
Well, and frankly, I think the governor's pretty well in tune with the electorate. I don't think the electorate was that upset when he took that position. But I do, the rainy day fund has two components to it. And the size of the vote, whether it's a 60% vote or a 2/3 vote, depends on what it's being used for. We use the rainy day fund to cover the deficit. And we spent about, a little over $2 billion in rainy day fund last session, covering the deficit that we actually had, the real deficit where we were going to spend more money than what we had appropriated. And we use the rainy day fund to pay for the firefighting. Remember, Texas was on fire a year ago. Well, it had been on fire for about a year before that, and we had hundreds of millions of dollars of money that we had to pay for fighting those fires. So we use the rainy day fund for that. But if you're going to do that, and so that requires a 60% vote, and it really wasn't that controversial. The controversial issue was, are you going to use the rainy day fund for new spending that exceeds what you currently appropriated? And basically, I maneuvered around it by doing the deferrals. Yeah. So we spent it, but we didn't look like we did.
Yes, sir.
Senator Ogden, after hearing you today, I wish Senator Ellis had twisted both your arms and gotten back another term. So good. I see a contradiction in your conclusion earlier, where you said if we can't solve anything, we have to go back to the people that sent us. You know, if you look at the formula, the way it seems to me, where 50% of eligible voters vote, so the party that wins gets 26% of the vote. If you go back to that 26%, you're going to get the same answer again. So I mean, the conclusion I come to is you legislators have to be bigger and better than the electorate, you know, and therefore willing to represent all the people. And I don't know how many of your colleagues you see that way, but that's the way it looks.
Well, I'll let Mike comment on that. I don't think that's possible. I mean, we're only as good or as bad as the people that sent us. And I think one of the things that I found interesting in my 22 years was that I thought the Texas Legislature was pretty representative of the population. And we had great people, we had jerks, we had a lot of in-betweens, we had crooks, we had statesmen. But it was pretty much, I thought it was a fair representation of the state. And so I don't know if it's in reality possible for us to be better than the people that sent us there. I don't think it is.
Looks like we're going to need some bipartisanship, and I don't think you'll find it in the century.
You got to have a bipartisanship to get constitutional amendments out of there in general, because it requires 2/3 vote.
Only for constitutional amendments. He alluded to the 2/3 tradition earlier. I think we have moved to a system where it's kind of 2/3 when the folks in control want it. And we maneuver to this system of special orders, exceptions. And I think we're going to have to make some tough choices. Either we have it or we don't. I mean, the only worse thing than not having it, I think, would be having it when you want it, sort of going back and forth. On the issue of opinion polls, I've seen over the years that people use opinion polls if they make a decision they don't want to do something, and opinion polls agree with them, they hide behind it. And if it's the opposite of that, then they don't pay attention to the opinion polls, even if somebody is the governor. I mean, if we just went up there and just did opinion polls, see which way the wind is blowing on deciding most things we do, you'd have total chaos. So I do think there's a need for more of us to take some risk. I mean, you know, by and large, you mentioned the hate crimes bill earlier, Steve. You know, I think a lot of our colleagues who thought it was going to get them defeated, it may have been raised in a race or two, but there were far more far left, far right, or crazier things that they did in the districts. You know, usually it takes, you all are very forgiving. You know, it's usually an accumulation of things we've done. Or it's really the minor stuff, like somebody stayed in the more expensive hotel. I mean, that's the stuff that ends up in a ad that gets us defeated. It's usually not the big earth-shattering issues like, did you go into the rainy day fund? And it's how you ask the questions on these opinion polls. Because by and large, I think you send us there to look at it and pay a little more attention. That's why you hire us for $600 a month. You expect us to dig into it a little deeper than you dig into it. And I think that's a real challenge. I think so many people trying to hold on to their seats. When that cycle comes up, it makes it real difficult. One more question. I saw John Sharp come in. You know, some of my children may get in A&M, so I don't want to get him angry. We have one more question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is for Senator Ogden, or whoever else wants to answer this. But while you're speaking, you were making comparisons between Texas and Congress. I actually think a more fair comparison would be Texas versus other states. And so given your tenure within the Legislative Assembly, I want to know your thoughts on things that other states can learn from Texas and things that Texas can learn from other states in terms of economic stability and like social stability.
Well, in my opinion, right now, Texas is on a roll. And what I thought I learned was that California and New York were doing a magnificent job of messing things up and making them worse than they needed to be. I think if you look, there's a couple of general observations between low-tax states and high-tax states. And there was an interesting article that was written by a reporter in for the Los Angeles Times about high-tax California and relatively low-tax Texas, and the question was, how come everybody from California is moving to Texas? And the conclusion is because, in general, the people didn't feel like the government was providing services at a value that was worth the taxes that they were paying. So that people, if you ask them, will say, I don't mind paying taxes, but I want to get my money's worth for it. And the general feeling in California was they were paying a lot of taxes, but they weren't getting much good government for it. And so the conclusion is, if I'm going to get crappy government for high taxes, I just as soon have no government for low taxes. So let's go to Texas, okay? That's one point. The other point is, I think we understand this, all of us, Republicans and Democrats alike, but it was a concept that I developed when I first ran in the back in 1997 for the Senate. And at that time, I was the first Republican to ever represent this part of the state. My part of the state had a bigger interest in state government than any district there is. Texas A&M was there. Sam Houston State is there. It's the home of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. 30% of all the convicted felons in Texas call my district home. Okay? State government is the biggest deal going in the 5th Senatorial District. I represent Williamson County. Tens of thousands of people in Williamson County drive to Austin every day to work for the state. So here was the rhetorical question. Why should you vote for a conservative Republican to represent a district that has such a vested interest in state government? And this was my answer. And this is what I think the Texas Legislature knows, both Republicans and Democrats, and we've done a pretty good job of preserving it. There's a direct and close correlation between the health of the private sector and the ability of the private sector to pay for the government we all want and know. And when we enact policies that encourage Texans to go out there and take risks, that encourage Texans to go out and invest their money, encourage Texans to go out and hire people because they can make money, not only is it good for those businesses, but when they're healthy, they throw off a tremendous amount of tax revenue that we need to run this state. And if you look at all of our budgetary crises, when the economy was healthy, Texas state government generally had enough money to do mostly what it wanted to do. And when the economy was sick, it was a problem. And so I think Texas, better than any other state, understands that relationship between the government that we want and need and the people that have got to pay for it, and to make sure you don't punish the people that have to pay for it in order to get the government that we need.
Would you join me in thanking two of the best statespeople and two of the best friends that Texas has?
We're going to take about a 10-minute break and come back and talk about education. We'll have people talking about elementary, secondary, higher education, talking about the lawsuits that are involved. And so look forward to seeing you in about 10 minutes.